Thank you, Anders. Hi, everyone. Very happy to be in Malmo. It's my second time in Sweden, but first time in Malmo. Before this, the closest I got to Malmo was a bridge in Copenhagen. So just a bit about myself. Even though I'm here to talk about China, I was actually born in Australia. And in fact, I flew across from Australia very far to come literally from the other side of the other end of the world. So a bit about myself. I was born in Australia, but I spent 7 years as a child in Beijing and then returned to Melbourne to finish all of my education. Now, in terms of what we do, so Tripalocal, I founded Tripalocal at the end of 2014, so we've only been around for a year and a half. Now, what started off as just a platform for Chinese travellers to get very customised local experiences. But after many iterations, what we found was that for Chinese travellers, especially, so we're talking about China going to the world, so Chinese outbound, any long haul, so long distance travel, a lot of them want very, theme, not just about pure holiday. Often they have another motive, or they want to get something out of it. And the key theme is education. So that's why we're actually at the moment focused on education tourism, so connecting Chinese students, parents, schools to short-term study tours, short-term programs in Western developed countries. We actually came out of an accelerator in Australia, and then we were funded by a Chinese venture capital firm with a few Chinese and Australian angel investors as well. So I guess the first point about China, and it's often quite a misconception. So everyone talks about China as if it's one market, if it's a singular market, but really that only exists on paper or on a pitch. China it's 1.4 billion people. People say, look, if we only have 1% of the 1.4 billion people, that is a lot of market share, or a lot of absolute user base. But really, China is really 34 markets. So there are 34 provinces plus regions plus various autonomous areas. And each province or each region has its own characteristic. Northern China is very different to southern China, and north and south in China is often divided by the Yangtze River. East to west, very different. An example, a friend of mine who works at a large Chinese travel company, they did a trial where they put a group of Chinese Beijing travellers with a group of travellers from Shanghai. Now, Beijing and Shanghai are probably an hour or 2 hours flights away, and they put them on a 10-day trip to Europe together, and it was a disaster because they spoke different dialects, ate different food, had different, living habits. They didn't even talk in the end. So that preference, that user preference for two of China's largest cities is so great. The difference is so great. Can you imagine if someone from Beijing with someone from further down south in Guangzhou would be a disaster, right? And that would impact how companies market or design their products. Another thing is, because China is so big, and because the way the marketing is very different to a Chinese versus to, let's say, a US and Australian, even Europeans, I always tell the startups that come to me for advice is as a startup with limited resources and limited capital, only focus on on day one, make a choice about whether you want to focus just on China or the rest of the world, but never try to do both. There are a lot of startups who say, I'll look at the US market, the UK market, the German market, and the Chinese market. Well, that's it's almost impossible, because Facebook is banned. You can't use Facebook, you can't use Google. China has its own, channels of marketing. So essentially, the products also have to be localized, not just marketing localization, but product localization. So in a way, it's very hard, you have to pick and choose. And for us, we're one of the very few Australian, or what started off as an Australian startup, we're now based in Beijing, to focus exclusively on the Chinese market because it's big enough for us, and also we're a bilingual team of Chinese and English speakers. So that gives us, compared to other foreign startups, an unfair advantage. In terms of the major trends the Chinese startup scene in general probably started, the latest wave. It came in waves. Baidu was the sort of, I guess, the first wave in the late 90s, and there was Alibaba. And this recent wave probably started around 2011, 2012. And it's largely driven by the amount of capital available. So, until late 2015, the sectors that were very popular were the likes of O2O. So O2O, it's I guess a shorthand for online to offline. So bringing customers online, so finding online marketing channels or growth hacking, and then bring them to actually purchase stuff in physical stores or actually purchase physical products. E-commerce, so especially when Alibaba IPO'd, they call it probably one of the greatest mass wealth creation events, because a lot of the early employees became very, very well off, and they started to invest in other startups. And China is probably a market where, because so many users, you have a huge user base, it's enough to just focus on particular niche or verticals in e-commerce. There are lots of startups who just sell Korean products or Korean or Japanese products to Chinese consumers. There are those who just sell Australian products to Chinese consumers. And that is big enough, the market is big enough for them to grow to a significant size. A lot of marketplaces, so there are lots of, the Airbnbs for China or the sharing economy, that was sort of the cool thing to do. But the fundamental, I guess, structure or allowed for all these 2C models or direct-to-consumer models to take off is the amount of capital that was there. Chinese, it's quite, in China, when you do a direct-to-consumer play, the mentality is all or nothing. So the winner takes all and everyone else is left with nothing, which means that people would raise, before they even have a product, the first thing a Chinese startup would do is they would try and raise capital. They'll raise 1 to 2 million US as their angel round, so that they can go out very hard and literally burn cash to acquire users. So that the model really, the direct-to-consumer model is really what many of us would say B2VC. So it's it's really the venture capital that's funding, that's really supporting this entire ecosystem of 2C business models. But when the share market crashed in mid 2015, so we actually closed our angel round 2 weeks before the Shanghai share market crashed in June 2015. And I was in Shanghai at the time, and it was like pretty horrendous time. People stopped spending all of a sudden. From then onwards, there's sort of I wouldn't say the bubble burst, it was definitely a deflation the bubble deflated from this capital euphoria to what is now, and will probably be for the next 1 or 2 years, a capital winter. So the amount of capital is still there, but the deployment rate or the velocity has really reduced, which means that since late 2015, the type of companies that were popular with investors are those that actually generate a cash flow. Those that actually makes a profit or a gross margin. Like how a sustainable business should be. So that's for us what I think is a return to a normality in the Chinese ecosystem. And the type of the latest trends are more, I guess, focused on either content creation, so live streaming is very, very popular, and it's particularly popular for those in a tier 2, 3, 4 city where they don't have as many alternative in what they do in their free time. So they'll just live stream someone. I've seen videos of people live streaming themselves having a meal, having dinner, and there'll be thousands of people watching them online and commenting and giving like red packets. For me, it's very bizarre. I got quite bored after about 10 seconds, but there are people sitting there for like half an hour watching them eating a meal, right? But then that really tells me about for understanding what a local customer, which is the local target base, tier 2, 3, 4, less developed parts of China. That's what they want. And virtual reality, augmented reality, it's a bit controversial. Many people think that VR is probably too early stage at the moment, looking at, probably three to 5 years time is where the peak would be. Whereas AI, I think it's a quite good time to get in. Other things like robotics, China has the world's best or one of the best drone companies. DJI has 50% of the world's market in drones, and so generally the model is about to be or to business or via a business channel to get to the direct consumer, because then that the cost of customer acquisition lowers and works in an environment where there's not much capital. So in terms of innovation for China, it is really about, I guess, how it's called the business model innovation, right? And I'll give two examples here. One is Didi Taxi, which is sort of the Uber of China. They actually acquired Uber China a few weeks ago. So Uber is now out of China. What they do is how they I guess won the race is they could raise more capital than anyone else. And Chen Wei, the CEO, he is very, very good in terms of employing the right people. In terms of they would literally. How they started is they started at Beijing Capital Airport, Terminal 2, and just try and literally gave out vouchers, paid people to use their taxis. They even gave smartphones to taxi drivers. They would pay people their full-time job is to take taxis using their app initially for the first few months to get that user base going. And how they would. And the key thing they understood is, unlike Uber, which went to disrupt the market by going straight to private cars, they realised that there are so many vested interests in the government for taxis. So they've worked with taxis first. They gave the taxi drivers the apps and used it as a way to match drivers with the customers. But once there was enough user base, then they moved on to private cars. Then they tried to really disrupt the market. So it's first about so if Uber came in, Uber would have adopted the Uber model, and that would have never worked initially, because it's that the whole big government mentality that you have to localize first. In terms of Xiaomi, so Xiaomi is people call it the Apple of China, but really it's an internet services company. It's known for its really good smartphones, much cheaper than Apple, but Apple makes its money from selling the phones and getting a big profit out of it. What Xiaomi does is it's creating an ecosystem that leverages its handset, leverages the Android stores. It has a whole ecosystem of startups, of smart connected startups that can use the hardware and then hook it up with the software. It's in watches. It actually produces air purifiers. Invests in a lot of startups that can leverage its integrated platform. Now, as far as I can see, so you can see it as a Apple plus a Google that covers both the hardware and the software. Now, WeChat, my favorite app, the app of apps. I can actually just live in China with nothing but just WeChat. I tried it when my phone was wiped accidentally in Beijing a few weeks ago. WeChat, what is WeChat? So it's literally a Facebook plus YouTube plus WhatsApp. You can eBay, PayPal, Twitter, everything. You can do everything in it, pretty much. Penetration rate, 93% of tier 1 cities in China uses WeChat, just under 70% in tier 2 cities. And typically, what WeChat does is it really, at the core, it's something that understands the Chinese user preference, in the sense that a Chinese is one app that has everything in it, as opposed to Western apps. Typically, it's a very focused, single-function app. That's just an example of what a typical day looks like for a Chinese user. You get up, and from 7 in the morning to 10 at night, your whole life you can do stuff. You can read news, you can send money. I don't use cash or cards anymore. I just use a QR code to pay people using my WeChat account. You can shop, you can play games, you can read, you can do everything in it. And as an example of how we use WeChat is, it starts on the left as we have an official account, which is sort of our portal, that's our marketing front. And then onto the second one, this one here, you can actually there's a menu for products, for our travel products, which he selects one of the menu and then comes up an actual product. And then lastly, you can actually pay. So this is all done within the WeChat browser, which means we don't actually have to build a separate app. And the marketing is much cheaper because WeChat has 700 million active users per month. So promoting it, I can either promote on Android source or promote in existing user base. So just to finish off with the lessons I learned in my year and a half in China is number one, people. It's not just about how good or how localized product is, but having the right people on board, having the right relationships. Everywhere it's about relationships, but China is even more so, and in a very, I guess, legitimate way. The capital markets, I talked about, the rise and fall, and we're quite lucky to experience that euphoria, that big contrast in the year and a half. It normally takes someone 5 to 6 years in the game to see that full cycle. In terms of my advice to startups, any foreign startup wanting to go into China, avoid direct-to-C business models. Why? Because it's very hard to compete. The speed at which Chinese startups move is crazy. They raise a lot more capital in China than a foreign startup can, and therefore they literally will acquire users at $20, $30 per user, making complete loss. That's fine because it's all about who outlasts who. That picture of here is what we call an app farm. There's a whole industry in China that what they do is they go around and downloading your apps for you to build your user base, right? To make numbers look good, so you can raise more capital. But because you have more capital, you can probably outlast all your competitors, and that's when you make money, right? That business model, it's whether it works or not, it's open. I mean, that's how Didi probably didn't use this particular method, but Didi outlasted Uber China, everyone else, because they had the most capital. And then lastly is finding the right channel in terms of finding the right offline channel first, and then be very targeted in terms of leveraging that to like school. So we always go through school accounts to get to the students because it's directed, it's captive audience, and it's cheap. So these are my details. To finish off, I think China is very exciting. Make a decision about what the market is, whether it's China. If it's for China, then just go and figure the rest of the world. Thanks very much.